Okay, it's going to be public, and it's going to return an enumeration of speedruns. And it's simply called get all speedruns. Okay. Yeah, since the repository was injected via the constructor, we can just use that and say return speedrun repository get items. That's it. And since it's so compact and small, we're going to use an expression body. Is this really everything we need to do, or is there something else? I think so far that's all we want, right? Okay. Actually, you know what we want to do is save all. Okay. Now finally we can define our web service, and we can do that by adding a new project, and it's going to be a Wcf service. There's different project types here: Wcf service, Wcf service application, Wcf service library, both in C# and Visual Basic. Of course, we want to choose C#. The Wcf service application. Yeah, because we want to host the Wcf service in IIS. IIS stands for Internet Information Services. It used to stand for Internet Information Server, but that was changed quite a while ago. Yeah, we want to. It's a hosting platform for different internet services, as the name suggests. And we're going to use that. Call it speedrunwcf.web.app. Create. And this will create an actually executable app, a web application that we can execute, that we can run in IIS. Let's actually select this as the start project, because none of the other projects make sense to select them as the start project, since they're not executable, they're just class libraries. Yeah, so now let's see what happens if we start the application. It should just give us some weird welcome page. Yeah, it's just the directory list here, the file list. And now that we started this application, you can see that here in the tray an icon appeared of IIS Express. So like I said, this web service is hosted in IIS. So once we start the application, we automatically start IIS Express to actually host the application in. Yeah, so if we close this, IIS Express also automatically closes, I think. Yeah. So yeah, we now have a web application that is technically fully functional, and it also already created a stub for a service for us. And now we need to make a design choice. Usually what I like to do is define my web services in a separate library, in a separate assembly, and then reference them in the application. But I think we're good. I think we're good. I think we can just define the services in the application itself. That's fine. Okay, but we don't want to call it service 1. That's very generic. as we can see, it already created like a stub service for us. Yeah, we have a stub here. We can actually just rename that, or we could delete it and recreate the service. Well, I think let's have a quick look into the config. No, that's fine. Okay. I think we're just going to, as it suggests here, rename it. And we're going to name it speed. We can't name it speed run service. I mean, technically we can because it's in a different namespace, but I don't want to cause any confusion with the domain service that's also called speedrun service. So let's call it speedrun web service. Yeah, we don't need this. We should have just deleted it and created it from scratch. Just for demonstration purposes. These stubs that Visual Studio creates, sometimes they're useful, but most of the time they're just annoying. Well, I'm just going to delete this here. And delete all of these service operations. What does it say? There's no name violation. Why does it say there's a name violation? Oh yeah, because it's an interface. Yeah, that's right. It should be called iSpeedRun service because it's just the service contract. I will get into that in a bit. Sorry. I will get into that in a bit. Hold on. Here's the service. That's the service contract, and this is the service behavior. Metering speed run web service. Okay. And we don't care about all of this. Okay. So now, quick explanation. When we create a Wcf web service, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to define a service contract, which is an interface that basically defines, well, what service operations are available to the client. So we go back here, which is the interface, which the file is still named incorrectly. Whoops. There we go. And here as well. Okay, so now it's all good. So this is this so-called service contract. You define it by simply decorating your interface with this service contract attribute, which is included in the Wcf framework. So with this interface, we can define what service operations are exposed to clients, to consumers of this web service. And we simply do that by just doing a regular method definition, defining the signature. Now we need to have a return type. So we need to, hold on. Okay. Well, if I wanted this method do stuff to be a publicly available service operation, I would need to decorate this method with the operation contract attribute. So this tells the Wcf framework that when it starts the application and hosts the service, that this method is actually a service operation and needs to be made available as a SOAP service. We can also define or also create RESTful services using Wcf, but we don't want to do that. I'm not going to go into detail about the differences. It doesn't really matter. We're going to create a SOAP service that uses regular SOAP envelope and XML serialization to transport the messages. SOAP services are not stateless. In our case, it will be stateless because there's no state to keep track of. So yeah. For now, we can't define our service interface or service contract because we haven't actually defined what data we want to return to the client. We do know that we want to return the speed runs, of course, but we need to encapsulate them in in a class that describes the response to the client. We're gonna just do that, make that very simple. In our data assembly, in our data project, we're going to create a new folder and effectively a new namespace. And this is going to be called, I don't know, data transfer. Okay, and in this folder we're going to add a new class, and we're going to call it speed run response or speed run service response. And this class is really just a container, a data transfer object actually, that encapsulates the data that we want to return to the client once he made a request to the service. And this is optional to a certain degree, but we need to decorate this with the data contract attribute. Actually, we don't necessarily need to do that. It can be done implicitly, but yeah, we're going to actually explicitly do that. So basically that tells us that we're going, this tells the Wcf framework that well, this class defines a data contract, and what that means is that it's going to be serialized using the data contract serializer, which will basically convert the or turn the serialize this instance into an XML into XML, and then return that to the client. And all we want to include in this data contract is an array of speed runs. We might as well return a list of speed runs. It doesn't really matter because we send it to the client anyway, so we just need to make sure it's some sort of collection. And if we did use the data contract attribute, we also need to mark all of the members that are supposed to be serialized upon sending them to the client with the data member attribute. So it's basically an opt-in serialization. If I were to omit this attribute, then I wouldn't need the data member attribute as well. And it would just imply that this is a data contract if we use it in our service. But we want to be thorough, and we want to explicitly tell the framework, that this is a data contract and it's there to send data from one point to another, basically. Okay, so yeah, that's basically it. Later on, we may want to refactor this and make it not actually return instances of speedrun, but only return the data that the client cares about, and actually create data transfer objects from the speedrun objects and return them instead. But for now, this would be redundant because the speedrun basically it contains all of the data that we want to know. So we're just going to keep it simple for now. Later on, maybe if we add more functionality, we may want to refactor that. Okay, so this is our response, and now let's also create a class that encapsulates and describes the request that we get from the client. I'm just going to define that right here. It doesn't need to be in a separate file, but I'm going to move it into a separate file in a second. Hold on. Speed run service response. Request. And this is also a data contract. And for now, the client doesn't send us anything, I think. The client just calls the service operation, but doesn't really pass anything. But we may want to later be able to pass stuff to the service operation. So we're going to actually still use this type as the parameter for the service operation, even though it's empty for now. Another thing we want to do is in the response, we want to be able to tell the client whether or not an error occurred during the processing of the request. So we're going to add another property called isError or hasError, something like that. And we're going to set this to true whenever, an error occurs while processing the request. Whoops. So that the client knows about that. And we're also going to include a message property that then includes further details about what happened or something like that. If an error occurs, it may we may include the exception message here, something like that, or just make it say, hey client, something went wrong. I don't know. It's just to communicate the client that something happened. So that's what we're going to use that for. Okay, so as I said, I will move this into a separate file now, and I can simply do that using the quick action, the refactoring action, move type to speedrun service request. There we go. And now it's here. And now I can, in my service contract, I can create a service operation that returns an instance of speed run service response. It's in a different namespace, so I need to include that. And I also need to add a reference to my data project. There we go. And I will just call it get speed runs. And it will take as a parameter, it will be the speed run service request. And I will just name it rec. There we go. But now it's just a regular method in the interface. It will not be exposed as a service operation to the client unless we mark it with the operation contract attribute. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit exhausted. There we go. So now we have the service interface, but now we actually need to implement it. So let's go into the other, to this other file here. And it will also already tell us that this class does not actually implement this interface. So we're going to use IntelliSense to create an implementation step. There we go. And we need to tell the Wcf framework that this is the behavior of the service. And optionally, we can add a namespace here for the XML serialization. Well, we don't need to do that. We don't care about that. I'm sorry. So yeah, that's it. And now we need to implement this method. And all it's going to do is it's going to create a database context. And we need to, for that, we need to add a reference to our infrastructure layer, which is perfectly fine. This is basically our application layer, and it's perfectly fine for the application layer to know about the infrastructure layer. So that's fine. Now create the context. Via using. All right. That's not going to work because same problem as in the unit test project. Our application layer, our web app project does not know about entity. So yeah, we need to make it aware of entity and include entity into the web app project. So we're going to add a reference via NuGet. And we should actually, hold on, we should actually be able to just locally install that. If we no, let's just go. I mean, yes, we can do that, but let's just go the regular way. Entity. There we go. 2.2.6 install. So there's basically no way around this. Our application layer needs to know about entity because due to inversion of control, our application layer is actually the layer responsible for defining the concrete implementations, and the fact that we use Entity Framework Core is an implementation detail. Something went wrong here. Oh yeah, but that shouldn't matter. Okay, so Entity Core has been installed. Okay, that's fine. So now we have a context, and we want to pass this context to a new repository, which is the concrete implementation from the infrastructure layer. Speedrun context, speedrun repository. We need to add a reference to that namespace. There we go. Pass the context to the constructor. And now we want to create an instance of the service, which was called speedrun service. And in order to do that, we need a reference to our service layer, to our service assembly. So we add that, that's fine. I'm going to say speedrun service. It's going to be a new instance of the speedrun service, and we pass this the speedrun repository implementation that we just created. There we go. Now we use the service to return to retrieve the speedruns. We need to add a reference to the data.models namespace where our speedrun model is defined. And now we can use the service to get the speedruns, get all speedruns. Okay, now we need to create an instance of speedrun service response and set its speedruns property to the speedruns we just retrieved. But since this is an IEnumerable and this expects an array, we need to convert this to an array, and we can simply do that using the link extension method to array. And that's it. So basically this is all of the domain logic that we need to, oh, we actually need to return, of course, return the response. And also, no, that's fine. We need to return the response, but we also need to make sure that we handle errors that occur. So what we're going to do is we surround this with a try block. I mean, there's more optimal, better ways to do this, but we're going to keep it simple. And we're going to do Pokemon exception handling, gotta catch them all. So if any exception is thrown, while processing the request, we're going to catch it. And what we're going to do then is we will create an instance of response. Set its isError property to true, and send its error message or its message property to the exception message. Well, this would be a simple way to achieve error handling. Oh, and of course, in the catch block, we also need to have a return statement. There we go. And that should be it. I'm not sure right now if we need to make some specific configurations in the web config. I have to take a look, but I think that's basically it. Let's run this application. It's not going to do anything because the service needs to be invoked by a client, so we're not going to see anything. Oh, actually, this application was configured to use the test client. Oh, something weird. Oh, no, that's fine. I wasn't going to show you this, so let's just forget about this. No, what I'm going to do. I mean, yes, we could use the test client. Anyway, no, we're going to do something else. First of all, we're going to. This is just a website, really. This web app is really just a website hosted by IIS. So we can just add a new HTML page here and call it index, so that it's the first site that is looked for. Index.html. Let's call it speed run web service and just make it say, hi, you have reached the speed run web service application. And that's it. Just to start our application and make it show something so that we know that it's running. So it should now display that message here. There we go. Beautiful. And actually, what we can do, so now our service is actually running and it's ready to receive requests from a client. There's multiple ways that we can invoke this and test this service. One way would be the Wcf Test Client that you just quickly saw, or briefly saw. We could do that, or I can use a tool like SOAP UI, which I have already opened here, which is an application for actually testing web services. And even though it's called SOAP UI, it also supports REST services. It's really just historically named SOAP UI. Never mind. So we can use SOAP UI to invoke this service, or we can write a quick console application that invokes this service. We can do whatever, but for now we just want to test whether this is working. Something that I need to show you is that we can actually get a Wsdl for our service. I think it should be like this. No, hold on. So now our web service, our web application is hosted obviously on localhost using this port. And if we actually navigate to, let me show you this. So this is the name of our service, right? speedrunwebservice.svc. If we actually navigate to that URL, we will get, by default, we will get a help page. No, I don't want the client. I want the index page to be shown. Thank you. If I actually navigate to that URL, what's it called again? Speedrun web service.svc. It should display me a help page unless it's not configured. Yeah, there it is. It's in German, unfortunately. I don't know why. I thought if I... it's because IIS is configured to German. It doesn't matter. It just really tells you how you could use that service. And we can also make it display a Wsdl file, which stands for Web Service Description Language. It's really just an XML dialect that for describing web service interfaces, and we can access it by adding a get parameter called Wsdl, and this XML here describes the web service interface, and we can use this Wsdl, for example, in SOAP UI to create like a test project, and so that SOAP UI knows about this web service and how to communicate with it. We can also use the Wsdl to create client code when we create a client application that consumes this service. We can have this Wsdl. We can use it to automatically create code for us. So that's probably what we're going to do. So for now, I think we can actually use the Wcf Test Client just to demonstrate that what we have achieved is actually working. So let's start it up here, and it will automatically start the Wcf Test Client, which is really just an application that you can use to invoke your service operations, and it will list all of the service operations here. And currently our web service does not really support asynchronous service requests, but we don't care about that. So here's the synchronous method, and we're going to invoke it, and I can do that by, I think, simply double-clicking it. Yeah. Okay. So now I can actually, here, I could, if the request class actually had properties, I could set them up here, and then click this button here, which says something like invoke or call. Unfortunately, it's in German, but this basically says call or invoke. And I'm going to invoke it and see what happens. Is error is true. Okay, something went wrong. Oh, okay, yeah. Actually, I forgot in our application here, I forgot to include the SQL Server extensions for Entity Framework Core. So I need to go to References and also install Entity Core SQL Server. Go here, 226, install. See, this is why we implemented the error handling. So we immediately knew what was wrong and could handle it appropriately. So now it should hopefully work. I didn't mean to open the index page, but thank you. We need to select this file here and now click start or run. Double click the get speedruns service operation and then click call. Yes. is error is false, and we have no error message, and we have speed runs, a total of 4 speed runs, and if we look at them, if we inspect them, we can actually see that they contain all of the data that we were trying to retrieve. So it's working. We now have a working web service that we could potentially host on the internet, which we won't do, but we could. That retrieves speedrun data from a database. And now we can further improve this and further build, expand this, and make it like create another service operation where a player could submit their own speedrun statistics that are then persisted in the database, so that the next time someone calls the get speedruns service operation, they would actually see that submission as well. So I think we're going to explore this a little bit more and enhance it and work with it in a future video. Actually, I think there's one more thing I want to do in this video still. I mean, it's going to be quite a long video. Maybe I have to edit it into multiple videos. I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what is the current standpoint of YouTube viewers when it comes to long videos. I don't know. But what I would really like to do is actually create a client application that consumes this service, because that's another interesting thing to do.